So hopefully that all makes sense. If not, go through again and take a look at the definitions for the two, take a look at the flow chart and make sure passive versus active immunity makes sense to you. We now have this video that explains vaccines really nicely. So I want you to take a look at this video before moving on to vaccines. Go through, see if this makes sense, and we're gonna see exactly what a vaccine does to the body. So let's first take a look at this nice flow chart here, this nice graph. So we know that vaccines contain antigens that trigger immunity but do not cause the disease. So again, vaccines contain the antigen, so the stuff that's on the cell surface of, let's say, a pathogen. And immunity is going to depend upon the persistence of memory cells. So our memory cells are going to help us out in remembering this pathogen and which antibodies can be used to attack it. So let's go through using this graph, what exactly is going on from the start of a vaccine being injected into the body to the end of the immune response. So when a vaccine is initially injected into a person, okay, we are going to first have our primary immune response. So it's going to be slow to build up, and it's not going to be very strong. So although we are making antibodies, that primary response isn't going to be that intense. You're going to be making antibodies, and the memory cells are going to be remembering that pathogen and the antibodies that go along with it. Now, over time, again, our memory cells are going to remain and now keep this in their memory, okay, personifying memory cells. And let's say the person got infected by that pathogen that they got the vaccine for. This would result in the secondary response, but now the secondary response is going to be stronger and more rapid than that primary response, which is going to be very helpful because your body is going to quickly produce those antibodies because it already knows which antibodies to produce for that pathogen, and it's going to attack that pathogen quickly so you don't get sick or get symptoms from that pathogen entering your body. And once that second response comes into play, then your body goes back to normal and waits to see if that pathogen is going to come back into the body again, in which the body would be prepared. So again, by initiating that primary immune response, you are going to result in making memory cells that is going to help later on if you get infected by that pathogen. And again, vaccines, you can think of if you've gotten a vaccine at the doctor's office or a vaccine for a specific disease if you were traveling. A person can be exposed to a vaccine either orally or by injection. So there's two different ways that you could, or a couple of different ways that you could get vaccinated. So let's take a look at the overall process of vaccination. So now we know that vaccinations are going to help us become immune to disease without experiencing the symptoms of that disease itself. So vaccines are going to contain antigens, but it can contain the antigen in three different ways, and they're bulleted here. So we first have attenuated or weakened or inactivated viruses that will play a role, so it's not the full force virus, which is going to help your body create antibodies. We have weakened toxins produced by bacterial pathogens. And we have subunits. So this could be the antigen or part of the pathogen carrying the antigen to help your body, again, make those antibodies. So if you do get infected by the pathogen, you'll be good to go. So when a person is exposed to the vaccine, it's going to be orally or by injection, and that is going to initiate the primary immune response. So it's going to result in your memory cells remembering that pathogen like we talked about before and remembering the antibodies that go along with it. But sometimes a series of vaccinations is required to stimulate the production of a sufficient amount or the right amount of memory cells. So when exposed to the actual pathogen, your memory cells are going to help you out in triggering that secondary immune response. And remember, the secondary immune response is going to be much stronger than the first. And that is going to help with attacking the pathogen with a lot more force, and it's going to be much faster. And vaccines provide long-term immunity, but memory cells may not survive a full lifetime. So there are booster shots that may be required or booster vaccines that may be required over time to keep those memory cells in check. So we've been talking a lot about how vaccines have the antigen for that specific pathogen. But scientists and researchers have introduced DNA vaccines. So let's take a look at this bullet down here. DNA vaccines are being developed that introduce DNA that encodes for antigens rather than the antigen itself. Can you suggest how this would work? So I'm going to give you a second. Come up with some ideas of how a DNA vaccine would work against just an antigen vaccine. So take a second. What do you think? Hopefully you're answering at home, raising your hand. Well, you don't have to raise your hand, obviously. Okay, yes, so let's say you had this DNA vaccine. Your cells would take up this DNA from the pathogen and would start replicating. So your cells would start synthesizing the protein that was coded in this DNA, which would help produce antibodies directly. So it's another way of going about immunity with a vaccination, but in a little different way. Instead of the antigen itself, the DNA that codes for that pathogen or that antigen, which is very, very fascinating, very interesting. So now that we've taken a look and talked about passive and active immunity and vaccines, I want you to, on a separate piece of paper, explain the principles of vaccinations. And I know that the answers are all right here, but I want you to first go through and see if you can explain the principles of vaccinations by yourself, and remembering that it's an 8-mark question. So see if you can come up by yourself the answer to this question, and then come back and use this slide to help you out with your answer. This would be a nice review for you to see if you're really understanding vaccinations and passive and active immunity and how they're playing a role. Okay, so once you're all done with that, you can come back into Google Classroom and go to the How Vaccines Work handout. And when you go into this handout, you are going to be pushed to hit this link. And when you go into the link, it'll give you a lot of different information about vaccines and how they exactly work within the body. So you're going to use this link to answer these questions about vaccines, and then also these couple of questions down here, and putting the steps into the correct order while using the graph that we looked at in our notes. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe below. I really hope you are all doing well. I hope to see you soon.